Hello and welcome everyone to the Veeam Data Platform Resilience with Veeam Recovery Orchestrator webinar. My name is Jason Trier. I'm a Senior Customer Onboarding Engineer and American Team Lead. We also have Razvan Ionescu on the call as well. He's a Customer Onboarding Architect. Uh, if you have any questions as we go through this webinar, please use the Q&A panel. Questions in the upper right-hand corner. We will go ahead and get to your questions as you have them. So diving right into the webinar here, I want to go ahead and start off by just giving a little bit of a brief overview of the Veeam Data Platform. As you may know, there are a few different tiers of Veeam Data Platform. There's Veeam Data Platform Foundation, Advanced, and Premium. There's also a cyber secure program as well. We won't be covering that in this webinar though. So we want to focus on the premium section here. In premium, as you kind of go over into the enterprise resilience, you're going to find that recovery orchestrator and compliance there. That's going to be orchestration and recovery and validation, audit and compliance reporting, as well as proactively threat identification there as well. So, those are some of the things that we're really going to focus on and cover today. So why Veeam proven recovery orchestration? So what we have here is automated testing. So Veeam Recovery Orchestrator can do automated testing. We can do automated documentation, and we can also do one-click recovery as well with this product. Note that Orchestrator is an additional server. It sits on top of the existing Veeam backup and replication environment today. But these are some really good additional features that you get out of the product. One thing I want to touch point on here is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is net new as of 7.2.1, the latest current release of the product. What this does is, we can enable and disable this globally. We can enable this for current, existing users. We can also see the status of the MFA for all of the users that are currently integrated into the web portal and have access to that. We have enforced login to UI only, and not only for plan execution as well. But we can also reset MFA as well for any user. So diving into what orchestration methods that we currently support with Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. If you're familiar with Veeam Backup and Replication, you're going to note that we can do agentless backups, replication, continuous data protection, and we can also integrate with storage snapshots such as HPE and NetApp. So HPE 3PAR to be specific. And so we can orchestrate the recovery of these types of protected workloads with Recovery Orchestrator. So Veeam orchestration components. I just want to take a quick moment to outline, what are some of the key components here and the makeup of the Recovery Orchestrator server. So the Orchestrator server is going to be a separate Windows server, and it will also have a MS SQL backend, as you can see there. It's also going to have a couple of components installed on that server. It's going to have the Orchestrator server service and web UI. It's also going to have Veeam Backup and Replication server, which is embedded. So we're going to use some of the modules, API and libraries within that Veeam Backup and Replication server for the orchestration server overlay. This is going to be the same thing with Veeam 1. Veeam 1 is a lightweight variant of Veeam 1. So if you've got Veeam 1 in the environment, if you've got Veeam Backup and Replication in the environment, I would recommend to continue to use these products the way that they are. This is solely for the purpose of kind of the encapsulated full use case of the Recovery Orchestrator server. Veeam 1 server allows us to, as you may be aware, pull and gain information about and do data collection about the environment. So Veeam Backup and Replication servers that we're connecting to, potentially Enterprise Manager, Hyper-V, VMware as well. So taking a look at, this is kind of the cookie cutter sizing chart for Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. If you fall into that 1 to 1500 instances of protected systems, you can see there you're looking at maybe a 4 to 8 cores for that front end server, 4 to 8 cores for the SQL server from a compute perspective. And then for memory, we're looking at 12 gigs of on that orchestration server and 8 gigs for the SQL server as well. I think it's important to note here that it would it would install with SQL Server Express, but for unless you're just really just doing a basic level test and proof of concept of this product, you're really going to want to make sure that you're installing with either a already production instance of SQL Server that is standard and enterprise and has available compute to support the net new workload of Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, or you're building a dedicated compute server for SQL to house these databases. And as you saw, we've got those few different components there. We've got, in the previous slide, Veeam Backup and Replication, Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, and Veeam One. Those are going to be 3 databases that we're going to have to house and run. So that's why the requirement for that SQL server. We also have some Veeam sizing database calculators as well. We have some calculators that may come in handy going forward. We'll actually have that here at the end of the deck so that you guys have those and available to you. So taking a look at, panning out into, what are the placement best practices for Veeam Recovery Orchestrator? Veeam Recovery Orchestrator is, again, as I mentioned, that overlay on top of Veeam Backup and Replication. And when we talk about a disaster recovery of, say, a production site on that left-hand side here, we want all of those servers and components to be online during that failure. The first RTO or recovery time objective, we don't want to be bringing up servers. You don't want to be bringing back up your orchestration server or your Veeam backup and replication server that manages all of the backup jobs, all of the policies, all of the data locality. Where is that data located from the backup data sitting out on backup repositories? So Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, in an event of a failure, we're going to talk to Veeam Backup and Replication and say, look, we've got this data that you want to orchestrate for recovery into DR. I need to know where it's at. I need to know how to gain access to it. I need to know how to restore it. So that's a key important component and reason why you would maybe want, Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, maybe even your Veeam Backup and Replication server, your production server at the DR site as kind of just a best practice for placement. Note that we can also do cloud. Again, additional operational costs here, just because you're going to be running, operational expense of running these servers potentially in the cloud. But as long as you have network communication back on the, potentially production back into the DR site for recovery of those workloads, that would be a potential option to run those servers out in the cloud. So talking about supported recovery platforms that we have available today, we have VMware. We can, source from VMware. We can target and orchestrate back to VMware. Same with Azure Local or Azure HCI Stack. We can go ahead and do sourcing and targeting of that data and orchestration of it back there. Same with Hyper-V. Note Azure Cloud has a bit of an asterisk here. We can't really necessarily source data from an Azure cloud unless it's done through an agent. There's no native integration with Azure native, protection for Veeam backup for Azure or AWS or Google Cloud today, but we do have the capability to take those VMware workloads, those Hyper-V or Azure local workloads, those agent workloads, as I mentioned, and recover them into the Azure cloud. So net new to the product here is going to be that Azure local support, previously Azure Stack HCI. So we can go ahead and connect directly to an Azure local cluster, or we can connect to SCVMM and just notate here that you really want to connect to one or the other. You don't want to connect to both, so that's going to create some confusion. But that direct cluster connection is also now supported for Hyper-V. So that's a great option if you're not leveraging SC VMM in the environment. So VRO treats Azure Local the same as Hyper-V as VBR does, and that's just kind of a notation there. So the cross-platform support matrix here, if we take a look here, obviously, vCenter was, original focus and support for Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. So we have a lot of the capability and function of taking those workloads, recovering them into, Azure Local, Hyper-V, SCVMM, vCenter, and Azure as well. Same thing with Hyper-V. For most of those workloads, we just can't take those back to vCenter or Azure. And then if we look at Veeam Agent, really that core focus and support matrix is going to be for vCenter and Azure there. So not quite supported yet for Hyper-V and Azure Local. This is going to be one of the core functionalities. Virtual lab testing in Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, you'll see us and mention it or hear us mention it as data labs. So data labs is something that is currently available to doing orchestration and testing of VMware as well as agent into running virtual labs within VMware for that testing functionality. So if we're trying to bring those workloads back and bring them into an isolated bubble and do some testing on it, that's going to be specifically with VMware today. So but on the roadmap, looking at that potential testing potential testing possibility with Hyper-V and Azure Local, as well as the malware scanning functionality for restore point checks, and guest scripts and replicas as well. So those are all not yet supported, but things that are on the docket there. So important orchestration features. I just want to take a time out. I want to talk about these a little bit because they are extremely important to the product. We've talked a little bit about, what is Orchestrator, what are the components, what are the server, what's the makeup of that, from an infrastructure perspective. But when we dive in and log into the product, we're going to have two core things that we're going to be working with. And those are going to be recovery plans as well as recovery locations. So the recovery plans, as you can imagine, these are actually going to be the makeup of what servers we want to be able to recover. So you're going to create an inventory grouping of maybe some application front-end servers, some SQL back-end servers, some interdependent servers that you're protecting, whether that's with backup, again, or that's maybe you're protecting that with replicas, or you're doing agent backups of those. We're going to group all of those into a recovery plan so that we can go ahead and recover those together. Now, recovery locations is going to be, well, where are we recovering that data to? No, this is going to be specific to restoration of backups, because backups are, you're housing that data in a repository. We need to be able to tell Veeam, where is that data going? Where am I restoring it to? Am I bringing it back to a Hyper-V host? Am I bringing it back to, this ESXi cluster? What data stores am I going to be housing that data on when I rehydrate it? So those are extremely important. And you'll see that recovery locations are not required for the failover of replicas, because replicas were already setting up replication jobs and the data is already sitting within, maybe from a source ESXi, we're doing replication of that data into a target ESXi or DR environment. The VMX, the VMDK files, the entire VM's already sitting in that location. So we're not having to specify, that compute and that storage location in a recovery location to where that data is going to be sitting. So that's just a notation there. So a quick demo, I want to dive into the lab here, show you a little bit around the console, the administration, just the high level quick configuration items. All right. So coming over to Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, first you'll see that I'm actually sitting on the Veeam backup and replication server right now. I'm connected to the VRO server via this 9898 port, and I'm currently sitting on the home dashboard, taking a look there. But before we dive into that, I just want to switch over to the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator server and show you that we've got the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator app here. We've got the Veeam One client. We also have that embedded Veeam backup and replication application installed here. These are obviously going to bring you to the web interfaces, and that'll bring open the legacy thick app there. So coming back here, I want to just pop over to administration, which is going to be in the upper right-hand corner here. Going to go ahead and refresh this here. Let us do this.
So I guess it's not a good demo unless it creates trouble.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll go directly on to the server itself here. I think what we were getting there was Chrome wasn't supporting the certificate there. So it wasn't allowing us to connect to Recovery Orchestrator interface. But we'll go ahead and go over to the VRO server and we'll log in there to show you. Don't expect to see that when you're using the product. That's just specific to the lab that I'm using right now. So again, so we come back into the interface. We're going to go back over to the administration tab here. And on this left-hand side, you're going to see Veeam Data Platform. This is going to be the Veeam backup and replication server that we're connected to, and as well as VRO, which VRO is the embedded Veeam backup and replication server instance. You also see that we're connected to vCenter. In our environment is a single vCenter managing both sides, Site 1 and Site 2. So you may, in your environment, have two vCenters, a Site 1 and a Site 2 vCenter, something like that. We'd coming into Microsoft, we'd have this is actually SC VMM. Right now, currently not connected right now in my lab here, but you would, if you're using that or if you're using clusters, you would actually see those here. So if you guys are leveraging, HP 3PAR, if you're doing the NetApp storage replication, currently Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, all we have today is support for, those in Orchestrator. Obviously, Pure Storage, some of those other things is definitely on the roadmap. But with that storage replication, you get entire LUN and data store failover. Recovery locations, as I mentioned, so this is going to where you're going to come in and configure those recovery locations. Currently today we have a Hyper-V environment. We've got that VMware Site 2 being DR for that location where we're going to be recovering those workloads. Data labs I mentioned a little bit about. This is where we'd configure those data labs. And if you're familiar with Sure Backup or Virtual Labs in Veeam Backup and Replication, data labs is really just an extension of that. And Rasmus we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I do want to, just take a minute and say, if you guys, we've went over some good content here. If you have any questions, please ask those in the chat as you have them. Coming back over and talking about scopes, scopes are going to give you that capability of really defining more of a granular control over access and capabilities for users in Recovery Orchestrator. Somewhat like an RBAC type control. we can build multiple scopes. Say if you want to scope for built-in is going to give you the scoping of basically access to the entire server, but the recovery orchestrator, you could have, say, within here, within scopes, you could have one for like HR or accounting. If you've got specific sites or specific requirements for certain administrators to only have access to recovery of specific systems or testing of specific systems. That's where we come in and create more of that granular control. We can come in here, right? This server is currently connected to the domain. If you're familiar with any of our security best practices, we do recommend that it's either, it's okay to have this connected in the domain, but it's more secure. You limit your attack vector in the event that you put this in a work group, or you put this in a maybe a secondary management domain that you have available, a separate domain that you're using to manage just specific infrastructure, and having authentication that way. You can see that's where we can see where our MFA is enabled. If it's disabled, you can see we can enable it here. We can add users, we can add groups, and we can define users and scoping that way. So quickly touching on how would you scope. So if we create different scopes, how would we limit access based on those scopes? So what I would do is I could come in here and I could say I only want, that particular HR accounting to have access to these specific objects within Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. And that's how you would go in here, and then you could add the scope that you would maybe want that to have access to. Plan steps, these are baked in. You can create custom plan steps, but plan steps are essentially going to run either in the pre-steps, the post-steps of the orchestration or recovery plan failure. It's also going to happen at the VM level, so when or orchestration level of the server, right? So if we're saying, hey, VM01, we want to orchestrate this recovery, what do I want to happen during that orchestration event? So we might be doing some antivirus checks. We might be doing some heartbeat checks if it's VMware, and we want to make sure VMware tools is looking good. We want to do some ping checks for that as well. And then again, as I mentioned, you can do some custom scripting. If you do PowerShell modules, a PS1 script, you can go ahead and build that, import it in, and create your own custom steps that you might want to function here. Credentials, these are going to be credentials that you're using to authenticate to other things in the environment. Maybe that's your production Veeam backup and application server. Maybe that's vCenter. When you connect to your production Veeam backup and replication instance, it's going to go ahead and do a catalog of the vault of all of the passwords that you have. It's going to pull them over to Recovery Orchestrator. When we do that initial config sync of Veeam backup and replication, it's just important to note that we are installing an orchestration agent out there, and that's going to create that encrypted connection between the servers. If you're familiar with YARA rules, relatively new to the platform as well, you can do some custom malware scripting and identification through signatures with YARA rules if that's something that you would like to do. Configure SMTP, that'll be important. Rasmus will dive into maybe some of the reasons we want to configure SMTP a little bit here later on. Some settings, we've got reports. Well, maybe I'll touch on that here just a little bit. I mean, that's why we'd have some of the mailing features is for reporting if you want to get sent reports out of the program. Licensing, we can look at licensing here. Logs, we can pull logs from anything that we're actually connected to in the environment, as you see, these other Veeam backup or application servers and what have you. So quickly pulling out of the administration here, I want to pop back into the dashboard. You can see we've got some things configured in this already today. So you're going to see, the status of, plan execution. When's the last time we ran any of these plans? A readiness check. Have we checked these plans? Are they good to go? Are we able to, if they pass, are they are successful. Do we think they're successful in the event that we need to use them to use them to fail over? Any data lab testing? What are the current status of anything that we've been doing with that? Um, Top RPO issues. Again, these are just widgets telling us information about the current status of what we have protected in this product. Quickly diving into the inventory. Inventory is going to have a couple different things that you'll see here as we pull in data about the environment. So if you've got vSphere jobs, if you've got Hyper-V jobs, agent backup jobs, if you've configured anything in a vSphere tag, um, those are all things that are going to be in here. We're going to gather that data as we've connected to Veeam Backup and Replication, CLC, initial sync. A lot of this data will come in. vSphere tags is one of the things that I highly recommend that you use. So if you're looking to group those specific workloads, as I mentioned, you might have a front end server, a back end SQL server that you want to group together. vSphere tagging is one way to do that. There's another way to categorize and do that within, you can see right here, that's actually in Veeam 1. You can do that in Business View. So there's two different really ways to do that. But it's important to do that because you may have backup jobs that you have access to, but those backup jobs might not encompass all of those workloads that you want to put in a recovery plan and recover together. So the way to get your specific segmentation is to create a separate tag or grouping of those that may span multiple backup jobs. So that's a good way to go. Recovery plans. I'm going to go ahead and let Raz dive in these a little bit more as we go. I kind of touched on them a little bit about what they are. Obviously grouping them. We'll create a plan. It's really that all-encompassing. What are we doing with that recovery of that workload? Data labs. This is going to be where if we want to run a data lab test against a recovery plan, so we'd say, hey, I've got this particular plan. I want to run a verification of a data lab in it. So I'm taking those workloads, whether it's a replica or whether it's from a backup, and I'm going to take those and I'm going to run those inside a data lab into a isolated environment. And that leverages a virtual lab appliance that's managed by Veeam Backup and Replication. We have a lab calendar, so you can schedule those data lab tests. Say you've got monthly tests on certain workloads that you want to do or quarterly testing. That's a good way to do that. You can say, hey, I want to run this verification on this recovery plan, um, at a certain time at a given date. And then diving into reporting. So there's a lot of different reports that run into this product here. We've got four actually major reports. We've got readiness checks. We've got plan definition checks. We've got execution reports as well as data lab reports. So those are really the four. And plan definition just tells us, hey, this is what's encompassing within your plan, and then the readiness check again just tells us, hey, this we've kind of validated and tested our compute source, and the target that we're trying to go to is all ready to go. You've got the right, everything's looking good in that particular plan to be able to run that and during a failover event. The failover report is going to give us the capability to show the success and status of that failover. What did it fail? Did it succeed? Was there warnings during that failover? Same with the data lab test. It's that everything that happens during that test as we're booting up and bringing up machines, you're going to see all of that execution during that. So what I'm going to do is just quickly pop back over to the slide deck here.
I think I can take it over from here.
Yeah, actually, I think Raz, you're
Yeah.
you can go ahead and take over. Yeah.
I'm gonna do this. Well, thanks. That was really, really cool. I'm going. We really like demos, especially the ones that fail at the beginning and then they just go smoothly. Um, okay, so while Jason presented you the administration, the console, and how to actually set up VRO. Now we have VRO up and running. We need to actually start doing some recoveries, right? So let's look at what we can do with VRO, how we can, what are the possibilities that they offer. We can orchestrate restore from backups. So we can basically go connect to our repositories, backup repositories, and start orchestrating recovery of the VMs that are running on those, that are stored on those repositories. And we have here the diagram, and you can see on the left side, we have the production site with our uh, physical servers protected by Veeam agents, or with our virtual machines protected by VMware. And we run some backups there. We keep them on the backup repository. When we want to start recovering those VMs using VRO, what will basically start? We're gonna start a process through which we create the VMs from the repository. We can use instant VM recovery, which will give us the shortest RTOs, right? The fastest way to have access to the VMs. While the VMs were powered on, we will also start in the background the migration to the production environment, to the production data stores. However, if you don't want to use instant VM recovery, because this is optional if you're recovering virtual machine backups, then we can do directly full VM recovery, which will restore the VMs and directly into production, power them on, and start applying all the steps to verify that they are working. If you are recovering, however, workloads that are protected with Veeam agents, in that situation, instant VM recovery will be actually enabled by default, and we will use it automatically. As you have already an idea, we are using behind the scenes technologies that are already available in Veeam backup and replication. So instant VM recovery is one of those. You heard earlier Jason talking about data labs, which is basically virtual labs that are running in our VBR servers. In this example, with the backups still running in the still being in the production environment, however, there is an option in which we will actually have the backups in our DR site, because, well, we would like to protect the production environment, and in that situation, if production fails, the whole site is down, we need to start recovering DR site. We can use backup copies in this situation. Let's say that we have our backup copy job running in there. It's sending the data to the repository in the DR site. Then we will use VRO mostly in the same way to actually be able to recover those VMs to DR hypervisors. We'll be using again instant VM recovery, and we can apply some security scanning on those VMs. So we can look for malware scans, we can use secure restore before we actually restore the VMs in DR. So we actually make sure we don't restore from infected restore points if those exist. From the point of view of process and workflow, it is very similar to restoring directly from backups, but this time we are using the backup copy repository and the data that exists in that place. Of course, we need to have access to a Veeam backup replication server that can read data from the repository. Yeah, hence you see here the VBR server in the DR site. So that will be needed. The good part is that that it's pretty simple to basically to be able to have a repository attached to a specific VBR server and rescan the repository, which will automatically import the existing backup files, and from there we can take it over. what we can do when we're talking about restoring from backups, we can restore from vSphere VM backups to VMware vSphere and also to Microsoft Hyper-V environments. So this is a very good point that I would like you to keep in mind. We can restore Vim agents to vSphere environment, so from physical to virtual machine only for vSphere, and we can also restore from Microsoft Hyper-V VM backups to Microsoft Hyper-V VM backups. For the moment, we don't support restoring from agents to Hyper-V. Yeah, who knows what the future will bring us. Cross-platform restore to Microsoft Hyper-V. So in this situation, we're looking at the possibility, which is one of the great features that was brought in by VRO, is to help with restoring from VMware to Hyper-V. So this will help with, will basically enable orchestrated migrations of workloads of VMware environments to Hyper-V environments. And from here, you can already understand the benefits that you will get in the situation you want to do this. From the point of view of the process, it's the same as any type of, at what we've seen previously with the standard backup restores. We have our DBR server backing up the data, the VMs in the VPM or VMs on the backup repository in production. We can use then a backup copy job to send another copy of our backups into the DR site, and then we will be able to use VRO to orchestrate that restore, of course, applying secure restore scans and using technologies such as instant VM recovery to have lower RTOs. From the point of view how we connect to Microsoft Hyper-V, we can either use SCVMM, so System Center Virtual Machine Manager, or we can connect directly to Microsoft Hyper-V clusters. So we don't really need to have that SCVMM connection in between. Yep. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. Other possibilities. So far we've been looking at restoring from backups. Now, by default, or when you're talking about disaster recovery, we also think about replicas. Yeah, the main difference between backups and replicas is that the backup is the data that we already have on a repository. It's a specific format, and we need to recreate the VM when we do the restoration. So we need to transfer all that data from the backup repository to the production repositories, create those VMs, register them with the hypervisor, and so on. And that can add to the time until we have our services up and running. If we need to have the services very fast back up, then we can use replicas. And Veeam offers two technologies to enable replication. One is the standard replication, we call it snapshot-based replication, and the other one is CDP, continuous data protection. The difference between the two is it depends very much what type of workloads you want to protect. On standard replication is usually very well suited to protecting workloads that have RPOs of 1 hour, 6 hours daily replication cycles. However, if you have workloads that are critical to your environment, where you want to reduce the possibility of data loss as much as possible, as much as possible, then you would be thinking about using CDP, and then your RPOs will go down to out to minutes and even seconds. We're not going to go into all the details on how to choose each technology. They are different from the point of view of how they work, but they in the end achieve the same result. In the DR side, through any of the replication technologies, there will be a virtual machine already registered in our vCenter server, with all the data already on the production storage, just waiting to be powered on, right? So again, if your SLAs are very tight, you need to get your services back up as soon as possible. You can't afford to wait to transfer data from the backup repository to the production data stores. Then think about using replication. The VMs will be there. As you can also see, we have some components that are running in the replication part, which have here the proxies, and these are part of the way the replication is implemented with VBR. And I'm talking about VBR because we are enabling, again, this replication using VBR. And we're connecting with VRO to VBR to be able to start the replication cycles to restore to fail over the VMs or fail them back to production site once, let's say, the production environment has been fixed. There is one critical aspect here. The VBR that has the CDP policies on it, that manages the CDP replication, basically needs to be online and available for VRO to be able to orchestrate the recovery of those replicas. This does not apply for standard replication. In that situation, we can handle also without, we can basically fail over the VM, the replicas, we have access to them, but for CDP, it is mandatory. Hence, you need to take care very well where you place that VBR, where you create the CDP policies. It has to be in the protected site, in the same place with VRO. Sometimes from an architectural point of view, it is okay to have, for example, a VBR in production side doing the backups, running some backup copy jobs to repositories in the DR side. And you can have, for example, the embedded VBR running as creating the CDP policies on the VR embedded VBR and having that one managing the CDP policies and the replication and the failover. We do support for both replica and CDP only vSphere VMs to vSphere VMs replication, right? So we're just we're using this for VMware environments. There is more. This is the great part. This is the flexibility that VRO is offering. And in the case you have, for example, HP or NetApp storage, we can use directly the integration with those storages. This storage is being basically being used to host the data stores for your VMware environment. What we can do, we can use VRO, we can connect to the storage APIs, and we can actually use the storage level replication to fail over the VMs. Now, there are a couple of aspects here. When we configure the storage level replication, we don't configure it this time in VBR. We configure it at the storage level. Right? So if it's NetApp, for example, you want to use SnapMirror as a technology, you need to go to your NetApp ONTAP clusters, open the console and configure SnapMirror. The volumes that are protected in the background by storage replication, they can be actually read by VRO, and they can be the VMs that are running, that are being replicated there in the background, they can be automatically recovered by VRO. And the process is that we basically see what VMs are existing on the replicated volumes. We're gonna go and register those VMs with vCenter server, and register the original VMs, the ones that are failed over, power on these ones, and apply then whatever custom steps or standard steps we have in the recovery plan. This is again, it's a It's an interesting option whenever we have an integration available for HP and NetApp storages. Even more things to do and look at. We can orchestrate. So far we've been looking at orchestrations and recovery between two on-premises sites, right? We have this main data center and then the DR site, and we recover from one to another. However, if we don't have that secondary site where we want to fail over, uh, we won't start building our own site, but we can actually use Microsoft Azure. So we can go directly to cloud and we can restore to Microsoft Azure. And in this situation, we're looking at vSphere VM backups and Veeam agent backups that we can take them from the backup repository and convert them to Azure VMs and run those Azure VMs directly in cloud. The data can exist on-prem or can be sent with a backup copy job to Azure Blob Storage, for example, and we can get it directly from that Azure Blob Storage. We'll be spinning up a component, an Azure proxy that will be used to actually start processing and doing the conversion to the VHD format. We can also apply some scripting to the VMs while we are restoring them. So we can do some configuration changes. But yeah, this gives us a great option, great possibility to use existing public cloud, Azure in our situation, and do not depend on a DR site on premises. So yeah, it's another option. Okay, and once we've looked at all these possibilities, let's now have a quick demo. And I will need to connect to the same environment that Jason connected and pray that it actually treats me nicely and kindly.
Yeah, I definitely think it's gonna like you better than myself.
All right, here we go. Yep, I really like it, so I'm happy with it. So I'm going to go very quickly back here to administration. To be able to actually create our recovery plans, we need to have the inventory defined and we need to have recovery locations. Now, the recovery locations, they are not always needed. So basically the recovery locations consist of resource group, which is infrastructure objects such as vSphere hosts, vSphere data stores that are used when we are orchestrating recovery. We don't need these recovery locations if we actually orchestrate only replicas. Why? Because the replicas already exist. The infrastructure is there. VRO is aware, doesn't need to do anything with on the infrastructure level. The VMs exist there, they just need to power on and do some configuration changes. For environments for recoveries where we do take backups and we create the VMs from that, we need that infrastructure information. That applies also for Azure. Yeah, we need to tell to Azure, we need to make a mapping, for example, between which vSphere network we need to connect to which Azure VNet. We need to tell, for example, to Orchestrator which Azure VM to use, size to use for a specific VM. So the recovery locations will come into play whenever we need to create a VM where we need to use some resources that we are not aware of. Having said that, we can very quickly look, let's see if this works, and look at how, well, the recovery location. You see here that whenever we're trying to edit something, it tells me you're using this recovery location for something, for a plan. Are you sure you want to continue? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I know what I'm doing in here. We're looking at the Azure one, randomly picked because, of course, we want to see if it's not working properly because it tries to connect to the cloud. Recover agent backups, recover VM backups. So here we selected what we want to recover, where, from which PBR server has the backups does those backups, the subscription to use, and probably I'll get another error. And then, yes, I can't properly read from that subscription. So we will stop here. You can see we can have some repositories, proxies that we define in Azure, which region we can choose, which resource group, cloud VM configuration, so VM sizing, network mapping for VMs and for agent recoveries. Maybe this time I'm going to look at this one. Yes, let's look at this recovery location. Yep, it's better. You can see here also enable instant VM recovery. We have this option. We can see the resources that are available for us in the recovery location from the point compute and storage. Whether or not to go above a certain capacity. So we have this protection inside the recovery location, which says, okay, if your data store that you are trying to recover on is already filled with data and you don't want to run out of space, you can stop at, I don't know, 80%, 90%, it's up to you. If we have backup copies, we can use backup copies. Then agent networks, well, this is a rule where we map IP addresses because we're restoring agents, so we can map IP addresses to certain virtual networks in VMware. And then we have VM networks, we're basically mapping vCenter servers, data centers, and the network of the source and of the replica. Re-IP rules, we can also define re-IP rules for Windows VMs, and we can look at data sovereignty. Now, once we have defined this, we also have been able to, we have our inventory. It's also important to have it, and Jason already showed you different ways of grouping. So the inventory is basically just grouping. This inventory grouping is created by the embedded Veeam1, and that is mainly the only role of that embedded Veeam1. It is to basically create the inventories for VRO and handle the recovery locations, and that's about it. It's not used to monitor. We should never use it to monitor. If we want to monitor, we should go externally. Once we have these two, we can go and create our recovery plans. Now, the recovery plans, as you've seen in the slides, they will be different based on what we want to recover. So we have replica plans, where we use standard application. We have CDP plans. We have storage plans if we recover from replicated storages. We have restore plans, which basically refer to any vSphere, Hyper-V VM, or Veeam agent backups that are recovered. And we have also cloud plans if we need to recover in the cloud. And I'm going to go quickly here. Let's create a new one. Let's say I'm not going to finish it. Call be very critical VMs. Can enter description and everything. This will be also needed for reporting, can be used. And here you can see the 5 types of plans. Let's see that we want a CDP replica. Now, when we want the CDP replica, we have several possibilities. So basically, we look at VRO will look at the inventory groups and we'll say, okay, these are the groups available. Which one do we want to protect? And we have a CDP policy. We can add it. We can see what workloads are protected with the CDP policy. We have a file server. It's a very critical VM. We agree with it. Then we decide how we want to actually process the VMs in that inventory. Now, we are showing you a demo here, but when you create recovery plans, you will be thinking at the application scope. Your application can have multiple VMs, if not tens of VMs, that need to be started in a specific order that have certain dependencies, right? So your thinking of a service that you will recover, you'll actually protect and then recover in a certain way. You choose the protection method based on your RPOs and RTOs, and then you create your recovery plan to restore, and you add all the steps in here based on how you want to do the recovery, right? Process the VMs in parallel or one by one. How many you can process in parallel? Which steps to apply to it, right? We discussed that these are steps are basically the core, the core of the orchestration part. You can see by default we process the CDP replica, so we'll make sure that we can actually that exists and it's going to be okay. We can restore, we can power it on, and then the other step is to check VM heartbeat. So this means the replica has been processed, has been started, and we're waiting for VMware tools to get on. And then we can add different other steps in it. This would be, let's say, some custom steps, like checking if AV is running. If AV is not running, stop it. Why? Maybe it was an attack, and you're figuring out that one of the methods that the attacker used was to disable antivirus. So this restore thing would maybe compromised at that point. So this would be some script that you're creating, putting in on VRO and running it on the VM once you can have access to that VM. You can check other things or again create your scripts, whether or not in credentials, which are the RPOs and RTOs, and this will be used for reporting and also to show you if you're respecting the SLAs that you assumed for that service. If you're not within, so you need to change this based on the RPOs and RTOs that you have defined at the CDP and you're expecting from your service. Yeah. So if my CDP policy is actually doing 1 minute RPO, having 15 seconds RPO here will give us an error. Yeah. The target RTO again comes from the SLAs. Which templates to use for reporting? We can define different templates. This is the default template, but you can create your own templates and customize your report, how it looks like. And you can select when to send reports, if you want to send automatic reports, and then at the end, we finalize it. Again, if you have questions, please ask them in the Q&A. Now, those would be steps. Those steps are more or less similar on each of the recovery plans. What's important to know is the recovery plans have different life cycles. So all the plans that you see here are disabled. They are not being actively used. So that means you can edit the plans. You can do different things with them. If you're, however, starting one of the plans, you need to enable it. You need to put in some credentials, make sure you're doing it on purpose because you're starting now a failover recovery. Yeah? If this is a test, maybe it's not a good idea to start it like this. If it's a test, you should use data labs. Don't start this in production because you'll have both production and the recovered VMs running at the same time, which will create chaos. You decide here, because we're talking about CDP, we have short-term restore points, long-term restore points. So what do we want to restore to? We see that our readiness check, the report is, the plan is ready to be executed. It doesn't mean it will be executed successfully. It means it is ready. We have all the resources available. All the prerequisites to run this plan are okay. And then we select restore point, and we're gonna basically let it run. At this moment, once the plan has started, you cannot edit it anymore. Yeah, it's locked. It's until you will reset it at some point once it finishes for anything. You can watch the plan as it executes. We have pre-plan steps, post-plan steps, very important. Pre-plan steps, they're happening before we do anything with the VMs, before we do anything with the recovery. Then we're starting recovering VMs in here, and then post-plan after we recovered everything. Different use cases, think about you have your service running And in post-plan steps, you can actually put in some checks to see that your service is actually running. You can run your own script and that you're checking, let's say, that your application is responding correctly. And that you can be done in the post-plan steps, and you actually know that you have successfully recovered. You can check then the logs. You can see here everything that we're doing, right? Pretty old state here, but we don't care. So we can monitor here all the time. If you go to VBR, you'll more or less see the same information, because right now, let's see if I can do this. Right now, what's doing, it's basically using VBR. But I don't know if it's this VBR that is holding the CDP plan. So basically, it connects to VBR, and it will initiate a failover for that VM. Data labs, these are used to test your recovery plans. Yeah. The data labs are based on virtual labs, so you have to create first your virtual lab in VBR in the location where you want to run that test. And once it is created, it will be discovered by Veeam, registered as inventory, and then it will be assigned to a scope. You can see here that the data lab is at all time assigned to a specific scope. Just going here, I'm looking to get it, right? The default scope. If you had here multiple scopes, so think of scopes as your application owners or different departments that own their own applications, and you want to externalize to them the failover and the testing. So you can create scopes for them. Then you need to create one data lab whenever for each scope that you needs to run some tests. And the reporting part, very, very quickly, already touched by Jason. There are actually 4 types of plans. When you create the plan, we run it's a plan definition report. When you create the plan, it's run automatically. We check that the plan is valid. Then we run readiness check, which is a very low impact and fast method to confirm that the recovery plan matches the DR environment and should run successfully. And then we have the data lab test report and the plan execution report. The plan execution report is generated after the plan is executed, and it contains all the plan performance details, provides information on each process machine, any errors that were encountered during the plan executions. And this is the basis of your documentation that you keep to show that you have recovered successfully. Also, you can get, when you run data lab tests, so recovery plan tests, basically in the data lab, you will get the data lab report, which contains again all the information required, but it is for that isolated environment where we tested the plan. Okay, yeah, you can see here, I wanted to show you the CDP policy. This is the CDP policy, and you can see also that this replica is active now because the failover was initiated by VRO. The plan is over. CDP has been the CDP plan has been run successfully. We have a warning, but warnings are usually not a problem. Well, it's a lab environment, so they're fine. So the good part is this information is actually being logged. You can troubleshoot on it. You can see what happened, and you can have your proofs. And having said that, I think it's time to switch over.
Yeah, absolutely. I can take us out here.
Yep. Stop sharing.
All right. A few of the last concepts that we have here, and I'll run through quickly. something that we often customers ask us is, do we have functionality and capabilities for a clean room, right? And think about this again as more of an isolated type of environment. We did touch a little bit on data labs. Data labs obviously being, that automated functionality of isolation testing within the within our product. But maybe we want to have a separate or dedicated what we'd call clean room. Customers have this. They have certain, specifications and requirements for their DR testing functionality. So maybe they have a ESXi host, a compute, some data stores available that they want to make available for, a type of testing or isolated test in their environment. So what we're really just kind of focusing on here is a lot of what we've already talked about, seeing that production side, seeing a clean room environment. We might have some VM replication between, those workloads from production into that clean room. We might have, some backups into an immutable repository. We might have a copy of that data here into that clean room backup repository. What we say is that time-based connection here. So if we're in that clean room, what we're doing is really just going to remove the connectivity between that production and that clean room location, right? From a network perspective, is we're going to cut that off, but we're going to run a recovery plan to bring things up into that clean room environment, and then we're going to segment that environment to allow for that isolated testing. And that's going to be done through, maybe some customized recovery plans. There's some functionality to seize, and I think Razvan, touched on this earlier, is this, seizing control of potentially of a backup repository, any, Veeam backup and replication or Veeam Recovery Orchestrator with the embedded, import backups into that clean room environment for testing functionality as well. So there's some definite options there. If we dive even further into utilizing virtual labs, with virtual labs, we're going to have, again, this really dives into more of the deep concepts of what's happening behind the curtains when that data lab runs. Won't spend too much time on this here. This really starts to detail out more of the networking aspects of it. The networking being really one of the key components of the data labs and creating those isolated environments, because we want to be able to have that segmentation available to us. Again, as I mentioned, there's a virtual lab, like a Linux appliance, that handles the segmentation of between that production and that isolated environment. On the lower right-hand side here, you can see this production data lab. And in this data lab, this ESXi host in this test is testing data from a production site to a DR. And so that data lab might be utilizing equipment at a DR site. It might even be using it actually at the source site, like actually a production location. Sorry, this is the production data lab. So it's utilizing an ESXi host out on the production site. So you've got that production host that might be running your real source workload of VMO1. On that left-hand side, you got prod ESXi01 out there. And then on that right-hand side, you've got prod ESXi02 acting as going to be that isolated data lab. Now, ESXi02 likely has other production VMs running on it. What really creates the segmentation, as you can see there, is going to be in the colors. Production being green and then purple being that isolation. Like, hey, we've got a separate virtual switch, no physical uplinking happening here, where we're going to recover that machine into and attach it to that network so that it's completely isolated. And this allows you to bring in multiple workloads into that environment. Maybe you got a VMO1, VMO1, a VMO2, and a VMO3, and then you can bring all those workloads back into that isolated environment and do your testing. This shows backup copy verification, even diving further further into the detail of, hey, we're going from a prod site, but now we're going to a DR data lab. What we'll do is just, I'm going to put this out here and make this available to you guys so that you have this. You can get the slides after this and, just review this a little bit more in further detail. And then replica verification um, as well. Through the orchestrator port diagram in here, this is just very, very helpful for when you're deploying the product. What am I connecting to? What are the ports do I need? Instead of having to dive into a user guide and pull those out, this is a nice visualization of that. Some additional resources you can put in your back pocket and take with you. The Heroes Champions Den, we've got so a community forum or community site here that you can go to. This is where a lot of different VRO topics are kind of being discussed. There's actually some guides in there that we've, some of the team, Raz and myself, have built, regarding the product, whether that's Linux re-IPing scripting or whether that's, how does this product actually work, and diving in more of the detail. So that's a good place to go. And really to kind of end it off, if you have a success story with Veeam, we'd love to, if you could share that story with us, and it'd be really appreciated. Our advocacy team is, really looking forward to speaking with you. And that's it, guys. That's it for today. I appreciate you all for joining, and have a good day.
Have a great day.